So now we want to talk a little bit more what's happening around our world right now. And the world that is being described by HR practitioners, by the military personnel started this acronym called Vuca, V-U-C-A, right? And this term that started in the 1980s now become used in leadership, risk management, geopolitics, and so on and so forth. It has become part and parcel of the management or organizational management lexicon. It's called Vuca. And essentially talks about what we call the four characteristics of our world right now, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So when we talk about volatility, we're talking about high sudden fluctuations, like the stock market as a metaphor. Uncertainty, we're talking about unpredictable developments. You probably know something is happening. Like, for example, if there is some kind of a merger and acquisition, and you know this happening, but you don't know how things are going to unfold from an organizational standpoint. Complexity is when there are more and more systems, different systems coming into play. And certainly in our world right now, what is happening on the, for example, climate front can actually affect what we call business decision, and what is happening on what we call the political front can actually affect what we call our business planning and so on and so forth. So systems are actually overlapping and creating a lot of what we call impact, right? So sometimes when we look at situation, we're trying to figure out how do we actually make sense of this high level of complexity. And then ambiguity, we're talking about unclear unknowns. And ambiguity can be caused by a combination of volatility, uncertainty, and complexity. When these three elements are together, all are together income, then the cause or the trajectory of how things actually unfold becomes very, very ambiguous. We don't really know where the cause is, but we are now trying to anticipate how things are going to go, but we don't know where to start. So ambiguity is talking about unclear unknowns. It means there are new elements in our space, in a sense. So that's VUCA. And these are some of the factors that is actually contributing to VUCA. I mentioned quite a few. Climate change. Right now in Singapore, we're talking about rising seawaters, and many parts of the world. Planetary and biological health. We're talking about animal and plant species. Animal and plant species are actually decimated, they decline, and it's affecting what we call our food source, depending on natural resources. And by the way, the pandemic that we are actually experiencing right now is one of those biological factors. Yeah. And then the other part that is actually now happening around the world, which is changing and moving things at a very fast speed, right? Which is acceleration of AI and smart technology. And we also see increasing workplace, not in terms of just having what we call multinationals, many different countries, multinationalities working in the workplace. We also have sometimes 4 to 5 generations, from Gen X all the way down to, the millennials, the Gen Zs are actually in the workforce right now. So that's a lot of complexity around those areas as well. And rapidly shifting social values because of the pandemic and because of the world has now given a different value set in terms of what we treasure of what's happening around the world. And I mentioned earlier on geopolitics as well. So these are the factors that's contributing to our VUCA world right now. So having said that right now, Seok, I was just wondering, what is your take on this?
Well, I think these are all true. And just now when you talk about, the workplace diversity, that's closest to my heart because I deal with it almost daily. In some of my clients' industry, like media, they actually can have 5 generations working together, from baby boomer to alpha.
Okay.
Yeah, because they have young talents, right, for shoots and all that. So yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. And also right now, even though some of these things that we don't fully understand, we don't know it's coming from this place, but we are actually feeling it in terms of, for example, certain product or supplies are actually slowing down. It could be slowing down because of what we call some some president does not agree with another president somewhere else, and they make trade tension and wars. Or it could be due to a climate change somewhere where it affects the stock, and now their productions are not there. And pandemic has given us a very in-our-face experience whereby, because we cannot go out, so some of it impinges on logistics, and some places they are not enough people to do the work, or they are not able to do the work because of government policies that stops them from actually carrying out their work because of the pandemic situation.
Yeah, that's true.
And by the way, these are areas I'm very sensitive to talk about, because you and I can talk about it for hours, really hours. Just one area, let's talk about just technology and AI. It's creating a lot of anxiety. In some industries, it almost like it levels the playing field, because the technology levels the playing field, right? You have a certain skill set of knowledge, which you may be the king for the last 40 years, but this technology right now levels the playing field and so on. So the way you compete in the environment is completely different right now. Small players can now be very big. Small players, right, with technology can be very, very big because they are very nimble and agile. In the past, we have clunky manufacturing, and now we have got 3D printing. They can do it at a fraction of their time. So all these are actually affecting us. We may not know that's what's happening, but we feel it in terms of customer demand, supply, logistic change, not enough revenue coming in, and then people are not taking up our product and services. All these are happening, right? And these are the complex series of systems interlocking and affecting each other in a sense.
Yes, and especially if you realize that your competitors did not come from your industry players. They come from like outer space, like, suddenly a tech kind of come into a construction, 3D printing kind of, they were never in construction in the first place. And it's just like how Airbnb and Grab, it started off, it's like a tech company that comes into transportation. So they can't even preempt that, these are the guys that's going to eat up my pie.
And I also think that because they were not from the industry, right, they are also not conditioned to think in a certain way. Because if you're from the industry 40 or 50 years, there's a certain hand-down way of doing things. And therefore, you tend to be in a box. But these people are completely from a different industry, just purely on technology alone. They don't see those roadblocks or whatever, vendor to vendor, or I have a relationship with this particular guy that goes back 30 years, and kind of thing. And so they don't have those constraints. So they literally can invent solutions, right, that will take you a lot of unlearning in order to do it, in a sense.
Yeah. And it challenges the policies, the national level, the taxation, and all these things. It really disrupts the whole industry.
And I am very concerned. I just get very concerned with people who are not even aware of this, and they are just sitting in their job and doing the same thing over every day, doing the same old thing, reading the same old news. And basically, they don't even know that their blinkers are on. They have got a lot of blinkers on. And so part of the thing about being in corporate, in organization and business, is start to see what those blinkers are and start consciously removing them.
So that's what really enticed me in the startup space that I'm active in. It really opens up my worldview about how big the world can be.
So I acknowledge that that's where you're coming from, and I work primarily with MNCs. And when I look back at my experience working in MNCs, right, we have to be able to go through the leadership negotiation, and it's not just about implementing the idea, but the idea has to get some kind of like multi-hierarchical buy-in, and that slows down the entire process. And sometimes it's not because the idea is not good, but just someone that are not comfortable with doing it in a certain way, with no other explanation, just the fact that this is the way we used to do things. We have to honor our relationship or whatever. So in other words, the bigger they are, the more what we call fixed structures that is hard to move, in a sense. Whereby the new startups are more nimble, more nimble to be able to move. Okay, so let me see, get back here. So what I thought that to give people a more personal experience, right, of what Vuca is, I'm just going to flash out a couple of questions so that you can start using this question to guide your own thoughts and see does it actually will correlate with your experience, in a sense. So as you go through this question, see how many of them are things that you can relate with, and how many of them are you able to confidently answer. And so keep those questions in mind.
Okay. Well, how often have I changed my plan and approach? I think it's like constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these 2 years are really different, I would say. I won't say more challenging or what, but it's just different.
Yeah.
Different in terms of the client's demand, put it this way. So I do HR consulting, training, and coaching. And I can see that, you know, if I would compare the demands 2 years back versus now, I would say that I am very busy because partly because of the clientele that I have. I work primarily with startups, a little bit of MNC and some SMEs, but primarily with startups. So in startup environment, they are very fast paced and they are not very structured. That's why they can be very nimble. But then it comes with its own challenges, right?
Yeah.
And many times is I will have to keep revising certain plans to roll out certain initiatives, and that we will always be in a WIP. There's never seems to be like a finishing product at the end of the day. Yeah. Even after we rolled out 2 times of communication sessions, I mean, the third one we'll still have some fine tuning to do to incorporate the feedback that we get from the first 2 sessions. So it's very much like agile kind of approach. Yeah.
So in mind transformation, in just mind transformation alone, right? Because of the pandemic situation, we may come up with a set of plans to do it this particular way, and then the next week, right, the government changed the rules and regulations. We have to completely overhaul, shift the dates, communicate with customers differently, maintain the relationship, being able to communicate in a way whereby it respects people in terms of their fears and concerns, but also help them to see that this is the best way forward for now, given the set of information that we have. So we need to be able to constantly read what is happening. 1, public sentiments, customer sentiments. 2, government regulation and so on and so forth. 3, the capability of our team to be able to deliver certain expectation, to make sure that we are able to state things that we can deliver and be able to phrase things in a way that is clear without over promising, but at the same time reassure customers of what they can get from what they have committed to us. So a lot of moving parts, So we have to move part of our program online. We have to move some of our business maintain face-to-face and so on and so forth. We can talk about this for a long, long time, as I said, but we just don't have a lot of time. So I'm just to run through all these questions right now for the audience to be able to run through this question quietly, just to kind of get them to think that this Vuca is not something, a fancy terminology. It's part and parcel of our lives. Yeah.
Is it right in the face, basically?
Yeah.
So yeah, this question is I've clients in technology, primarily tech startup, and I have one that is I have 2 in media that deals with influencers and memes, and I also have fintech, I also have e-commerce, I also have IT software, and I also have healthcare AI kind of chatbot kind of a business. So it's very diverse. And how I notice is that although all these of my clients are doing very well because of the tech and the e-commerce and whatever verticals they are in, but there are nuances that are hitting them differently. So like for tech startups, those of you who are in the startup space, they know that tech relies a lot on the funding. So now they are trying, now to get funding is getting harder because VCs or venture capitalists or investors they are a lot more cautious because the money don't come as readily. And fintech, which I thought would thrive very well, but interestingly, they are also going through some challenges because their partners, which are the banks, are going through a more stringent audit and highly regulated. You know, MAS is eyeballing them and stuff like that. So the users in fintech are also struggling. And those fintech that focus on SME, like micropayments and invoicing payments, are also struggling. So although sometimes the vertical or the market or industries they're in is booming in a way, but they come with the nuances of the challenges that that is unique to the industry. So it is not that straightforward at the end of the day. Yeah,
I'm sure that all the audience was tuning in right now, right? They also, I'm coming up with this series of questions, not only for us to be able to reflect on it, but to be able to also let the audience reflect for themselves. How are these things happening, affecting them, and maybe some of the questions you know are not even aware of it, but it doesn't mean that when you're not aware of it, it's not going to affect you. In the past, you say ignorance is bliss. Today, ignorance can be death.
Scary.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I just want to run through those questions very quickly, and and I can imagine right now people that in some industry they don't know how many times they have pivoted their business because some things that they rely on is gone. Some things that they customers are demanding is something that they do not really have the expertise. They have to kind of adapt it very quickly in order to survive, and so on and so forth. And then many of the people right now, I know there's a term called double heading.
Yes.
In organization, HR now managing what we call internal communication. Now the sales is in charge of what they got customers. Accounts is also in charge because right now they're trying to streamline their funds within the organization because revenue are not coming in that quickly right now, and everyone has got their own financial constraints. So people are doing double role, and some people simply have to shift to a different role because that person in the particular role is not capable of handling the change of the demands, and they have to take over those because they are seen as a person who is much more resourceful and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Sometimes just because a business is not surviving, it's not doing well enough, so you have to start cutting off certain part and take on the different role. So this is actually happening right now.
And in the startup space, basically they do Scrum and Sprint. So like in the agile methodology. So the project team that takes care of the business side of things, while you also have the managerial taking care of the leadership and the people capabilities and the functional aspects of it. Yeah. So last time they used to call it like matrix, but this is a lot more fluid. Yeah. So it's not exactly like the matrix system.
Yeah. And then in the midst of all this, right, it's when you look back at the last 1 year, right, when the shit hits the fan, like literally when the shit hits the fan, how do we actually see ourselves responding to it? Do we get a little bit more antagonistic? Do we get a little bit more controlling, or do we get a little bit more kind of like finding hard to get up in the morning because there's so much to do with far? So, oh my God! Sometimes you have things all planned out, and then this thing is completely taken away from you because the whole system has already collapsed, right? You have to your mind just simply go blank. I have to start from scratch again and come up with a different plan. So all that is happening. Are we able to maintain calm, clear-headed, and resourceful state when emergency rise? If there is a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate yourself? For me and also for the audience who are listening tonight. And are we making time and effort to study the important trends, whether it's technology, whether it's shifting consumer values, and so on and so forth? Are we actually looking ahead and what the future is going to look like, and how can we position ourselves there? So that's exactly why we are doing what we are doing in terms of taking our methodology, which is primarily in Enneagram and NLP, to enter into this space to help solve some of these problems, answer some of these questions in organization that's happening right now.
There's one word that I hear it quite frequently nowadays, which is the imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome. Yeah, it's like that self-doubt and nagging feeling to say that actually I may not be able to do this kind of thing. And I'm increasingly having that sense, because it comes from the impression that your plans keep changing and you constantly feel there's additional information that you realize now you can actually have a better plan. And so sometimes it gives you an impression that, do I really know clearly what am I doing? But it's funny that when the clients, they themselves tell you that they have imposter syndrome, So I think this is when we really start to look back and go back to the fundamentals. And in my training and consulting, more and more clients are looking at building the fractals, or which is the building blocks or the fundamentals of the businesses.
So what happens if you put aside all these narratives, right? What happens then? What is the Vuca world if you were to kind of like streamline it into some abstract takeaways or things that we can put our brain and grasp it, right? The problem talking about VUCA is most people, when they're listening and their brain get fragmented, there's so many things to consider, so many. But what does the VUCA world demands? What does it demand from us? What is something that if we have the capacity and ability and we develop it, right? The VUCA world may no longer be so threatening in a sense, right? Is the volatility, where it's asking us to be more flexible. That means the ability to quickly organize and respond, come up with an appropriate response within a short period of time. To quickly gather information, because a lot of times we don't know, we are uncertain. How do we gather information quickly and then be able to leverage on not one source of information, but information from different groups of people? How can we begin to cover some of the blind spots?
And to curate it as well.
And work with different people. Next one is be able to connect the dots. I call it, see the relationship between different sets of information. I think that today, if you are just within your own field and you're only expert in your own field, I don't think it's enough anymore, because the field that you are in is not siloed. It's actually connected to other things as well. Yes. So when things you're not aware of how things, the other system work, you can't leverage on that information and knowledge to supplement with whatever that you are, the field that you are in. And so this idea about being able to have expertise in different areas and be able to correlate the information, recognize the pattern, is what complexity is talking about. And ambiguity is talking about developing good enough plans to experiment. The only way to conquer the unknown is to step into the unknown. But we need to come up with a plan that is, we have thought it through, we are able to take minimal risk. Risk is a must, but it is not a haphazard risk, but it is a well thought out risk. And then so that we are able to get feedback from that risk that we take, and then evolve with the plan. Now the lingo is called prototyping and so on and so forth.
Yes.
I want to keep it very simple, right? It's about evolving your plan based on the experiments that you carry out. So if we have this skill set, we are able to understand and make it part of our lives, then VUCA may not be threatening. It will be here. We can't predict everything. Anyone today that's able to predict the future, that's my first sign that you don't know what you're talking about. Because the world right now, we can't even, in the past, people can talk about business planning 20 years ahead. Now you can't even look at 2 years ahead of time.
Yeah.
What's actually happening right now. So the idea is not so much about having a set way of thinking, but more so about looking at the data that emerging and then looking into the future. How do we actually take this longer term pattern and move it and evolve with what's coming to us and see the patterns as we move? So this is fundamentally a very different skill set that we are talking about right now, which frankly speaking, many of us, especially people who are older, people who are Gen X and so on and so forth, yes, you have got a lot of rich experience, but your experience could be the very thing that's blocking you from seeing something new. You try to predict anything into the future by using your past experience. That's one first sure denominator that things will go wrong, because the world forward is completely different from the world that we came from.
I think the key thing is also about moving from increased control to increased chance of success. Yeah, and many times to increase the chance of success is actually not to have that control. It's a very counter-instinctive thing.
Yeah. So a lot of this management philosophy, management practices, best practices, are the things that stop people from actually moving forward. Best practices are right now the so-called the stumbling stones or the quicksand that people are being sucked into. And so what is actually happening right now is actually, how do we unlearn and learn anew? Learn anew. So the ability to learn new ways of doing, new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things is the most important skill set that we need to harness and practice it on a daily basis in a sense. So that's what the VUCA world demands.